The Walking Dead is one of the most iconic series in television history, and the main show ran for 12 years and spawned numerous spin-off shows that to this day are still being produced and aired on TV. And on the surface, the franchise has been running smoothly for over a decade. However, behind the scenes, at least early on, this statement couldn't have been further from the truth. See, after the smash hit that was The Walking Dead Season 1, the then showrunner Frank Darabont was abruptly fired after reported budgeting disputes, and he was then subsequently replaced by Glenn Mazzara. And following this dismissal, an 8-year legal battle would ensue, resulting in Darabont being awarded a reported $200 million. Not too shabby, eh? But legal battles aside, we know Frank Darabont had very different plans for The Walking Dead. Plans that we would never see adapted to our television screens. But today, I thought we'd explore these very plans and see just how different the show could have looked if AMC had stuck with Frank Darabont. Now, this is confirmed in several interviews, but Frank Darabont's Season 2 looked a lot different to the one we actually saw. Firstly, the Season 2 premiere would actually not have featured much of our main cast, with people such as Shane, Carl and Rick totally absent from the episode, and would instead delve into the backstory of the Tank Walker, the one we saw all the way back in the pilot episode of Season 1. And this flashback episode would explore the fall of Atlanta and follow a squad of army rangers deployed into the streets of the chaotic city. Now, their original mission is to travel only a few blocks, clearing the dead and helping any survivors escape, which was a seemingly simple objective for these highly trained soldiers. However, this scenario would quickly spiral out of control, as slowly members of the team would die one by one and chaos would unfold on the city. This episode would also feature many familiar faces, as we would see Andrea and Amy attempt to flee Atlanta only to be stopped by a military blockade, set up by none other than the soldiers we were following in that episode. A large crowd would build around the blockade and the soldiers would be ordered to shoot civilians in order to attempt to stop the spread of the virus. They would then open fire on the crowd, but we would see Amy and Andrea pulled to safety by none other than Dale, a complete stranger to them at this point. And this would also help to explain why they are such good friends in the actual show. Anyway, eventually the episode would conclude with our squad being overpowered by the walkers, slowly dying off one by one until there was just a single survivor, who was bitten and defeated. This very survivor would then lock himself inside a very familiar looking tank and patiently wait for his death. And this tank would of course be the one that Rick Grimes climbs inside during Season 1. Now, this episode would not only give us some more information about the fall of the military, but also, in Frank's words, demonstrate that every walker has a unique story. Now, there is a whole article that I will link in the description that includes an interview with Sam Witwer, the actor who played the walker in the tank. But essentially, to sum it up, he said he got sold a dream. He essentially signed on to do Season 1 with a voiceless part, and then would get a whole episode dedicated to him in Season 2, which would of course never happen. This would also help to explain why a notable actor who appears in Star Wars, Dexter and The Mist even agreed to do a non-speaking zombie role, because I'm sure that AMC could have just employed an extra for a fraction of the price. But hearing the scrap plans for Sam's episode help us to understand the situation. Sam Witwer would even go on to say in this interview that he was gutted his story was cut, and that what was going on behind the scenes between Frank and AMC was really quite ugly. He also heavily implies that rather than the farm setting we got for the entirety of Season 2 in the actual show, the main reason Frank Darabont got fired was because he wanted to explore different areas such as Atlanta and various other towns surrounding it, which would of course cost more, hence why they argued about budgeting. But it wasn't just bottle episodes and different settings that would have been changed. In fact, Frank Darabont had vastly different plans for many of the characters involved. So let's get on to how they would have been affected. Now, in Frank Darabont's scripts, he had very different plans for some of the characters, starting off with the most well-known one, of course, being Dale. Now, Dale's character dies a gruesome death 11 episodes into Season 2 of the show. However, this death was in fact never meant to happen. See, Dale is portrayed by the actor Jeffrey DeMond, and him and Frank Darabont are extremely close friends. So close in fact, that if a film or a series is directed by Frank, then you are bound to see Jeffrey DeMond appear in it at some point. He appears in all of the Shawshank films, The Mist, The Green Mile, Mob City, The Walking Dead, and the list goes on. The two go hand in hand. So when Frank was fired by AMC, Jeffrey DeMond wanted out of the show immediately. He requested to be killed off, to which AMC respected his wishes, hence why we saw him die in season 2. But Dale's death happens way earlier in the series than initially planned. See, he was meant to receive Bob's iconic tainted meat death all the way in season 5 of the show. Now, this not only would have been interesting to see Dale's reaction to deaths such as Shane and Herschel's, but just all round would have been a fascinating study on his character. Just how long would he have been able to keep his moral integrity, as he was the group's moral compass for the first 2 seasons? And would he still be the same man in season 5, or would he have slowly started to morph into a product of his environment? But Dale's not the only one who would have had a drastically different storyline had Frank Darabont stuck around. Probably the biggest change would have been to the character of Andrea, as much like in the comics, Frank wanted Rick and Andrea to end up together in a romantic way. In fact, you can see the foundations of this relationship being set in season 1, with Rick and her's exchange in episode 2. But ultimately, this idea would be scrapped and Andrea would die in season 3 of the show. But if Frank's vision had come true, Andrea's death wouldn't have come until around season 10 of the TV series, which is a colossal extra 7 seasons of screen time for the character. And again, in multiple interviews at Comic-Con, Laurie Holden, the actress who plays Andrea, has voiced her frustrations at being killed off so early in the series. I mean, think about it. She got cast in the Frank Darabont era of The Walking Dead, one that promised her a pivotal role in the story for seasons to come. However, with Frank being fired and Glenn Mazzara now in charge, she would end up meeting her fate a lot earlier than anticipated. It also didn't help that the writers absolutely butchered her character, but that's besides the point. On top of this, Frank Darabont wanted to make a more faithful TV show to the comics. There were scrapped plans to have Axel kill Beth Green in season 3 of the show, which would have imitated the Thomas Richards serial killer storyline from the comics, and characters like Carl Grimes would have survived until the very end. And we possibly even could have got a Rick Grimes death that could have taken place somewhere during season 11, but the last 2 are all speculation. My point is, Darabont had drastically different plans for the series and many of the characters within it, and reading up on some of his abandoned storylines are absolutely fascinating. Like mentioned, if he'd stuck around, I think we would have got a much more faithful adaptation of the comics on our TV screens, meaning characters like Carol Peltier would never blossom into the absolute goat she became on our screens. But it wasn't just characters. Darabont also had a drastically different plan for the Walkers, which I will get onto now. Now, I'm sure we all remember the Frank Darabont Walkers from season 1 of the show, because those things were absolute menaces. They could run, climb, break windows, look under objects, and were all round just far more capable than the ones we saw in later seasons. And throughout the show, the Walkers would slowly become less and less threatening, to the point where they played as just merely a setting for human conflict. Well, until season 11 when they introduced variant Walkers, but that's besides the point. And yes, I'm fully aware that The Walking Dead is a character-driven storyline defined by human dynamics and interactions, so the Walkers were always going to take a backseat in the later seasons of the show. But Frank Darabont's Walkers are a prime example of how dangerous he wanted them to be. Instead of these slow, lethargic zombies we saw in the later seasons of the show, Frank wanted them to be capable and terrifying. So his season 1 variants would have remained throughout the entirety of the show, and the implications this would have had on some scenes within the show would be absolutely crazy. I mean, if you really think about it, Rick's breakdown in the episode No Way Out, where he slaughters hundreds of zombies, but now replace those zombies with the season 1 walkers. I mean, this would have been absolutely insane. And the episode First Time Again, where Rick and our group try and move a huge amount of walkers out of the quarry, but instead of these slow moving corpses, now imagine them sprinting full speed at our group. Frank's more capable and scary walkers definitely would have increased the horror factor to the show. However, it also could have risked taking some emphasis away from the characters themselves, as well as robbing us of some of the greatest moments in the series, because moments like Rick slaughtering hundreds of zombies would just be too unrealistic if the walkers were essentially fully functional humans like we saw in season 1 of the show. So I'm torn about the more capable walkers. Whilst it would have created more horror and tension within the series, it also would have made some of the biggest moments in the show totally unrealistic and probably impossible. In conclusion, we will never truly know what Frank Darabont's plans for the show were long term, but based on his plan for season 2, I think the show would have still turned out amazingly. Frank is one of the best directors in the business, which is demonstrated by the masterpiece that was season 1 of the show. And look, ultimately we don't know much about what happened behind the scenes, as many people involved are sworn to silence via contract, but the little nuggets of information available to the public paint a very ugly picture. Frank was angry his budget wasn't increased from a successful season 1, and AMC deemed his Atlanta episode unnecessary to the overall story. But it is a tantalising thought in hindsight, learning more about the fall of Atlanta and the military and meeting new characters, as well as having more capable walkers throughout the course of the show. I mean, AMC even toyed with the idea long after Frank's firing of making a spin-off around the fall of Atlanta, which is poetically ironic considering that very idea got Frank the boot in the first place. Frank Darabont's The Walking Dead would have no doubt been a lot different from The Walking Dead we saw on our screens. But no matter how ugly things got behind the scenes, at least it never affected production, because despite the show's hidden turmoil, they would still go on to produce some of the best seasons of television ever made. And let me know down below in the comments whether you would have wanted to see Darabont's more faithful and gritty adaptation of the comics. And although it is easy to say I wish we'd seen Frank Darabont's vision turned into a reality, I think what we got in its place was more than sufficient. I mean, The Walking Dead is and forever will be my favourite show ever created, so although it's intriguing to look at what could have been, I am more than happy with how it turned out. But thank you so much for watching today's video. If you did enjoy it, please do like and subscribe, as I am aiming to hit 30,000 subscribers before the end of the year. I'd also like to say a massive thank you for all the recent support the channel's received. It really does mean the world. Once again, if you enjoyed today's video, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next one. Goodbye.